My name is Alison O'Connor. I am the horticulture specialist with CSU Extension in Larimer County. And I will say that I know we're going to get more questions than I can answer. So my email is here. It will also be in the email you get tomorrow. It will also be on the last slide. So if there's something that you really want to ask, but we don't get a question or don't have time to answer, please just send me an email. So I'm thrilled to be here tonight to talk about late summer, which we're approaching, and then fall perennial maintenance and planting. Because I'm with CSU, I want to let you know that CSU is an equal opportunity access and non-discrimination university. You can visit our website for more information, and if there's anything we can do to accommodate your needs, be sure to let us know. And if you're like, what is Extension? I've never heard of this before. Well, Extension is the outreach arm of Colorado State University, which is your land-grant institution here in the state of Colorado. And each county office, every county in Colorado has an extension office, and we are here to answer questions, whether it's about gardening, whether it's about youth development, whether it's about how to preserve food safely at the different elevations. Your county office has extension staff and volunteers in the form of master gardeners when it comes to gardens and landscapes that can help you. So reach out to them because they are your local experts. And I am also happy to help you. I'm just up in Larimer County. So if you're contacting me from Grand Junction, I'm probably not the best person because you have a much different climate. But reach out to us and visit our website. We have a ton of information. What we're going to cover tonight are the following topics. And so we'll go over what is a perennial, little bit on design. I am not a landscape designer, and there are much better people in the industry that can help you with that. I'll give you some tips on how to place perennials in the landscape and just some general ideas. But if you're looking for a landscape design, extension is not the place. And so that's where we have professionals that can aid you in those decisions. We'll talk about planting and maintenance, and then we're going to wrap up with a whole bunch of perennials that you could consider for your landscape. And these are a biased selection from me. First of all, big disclosure, I am not the best gardener. And so I plant things and I hope they survive. I don't generally give them a ton of water. I don't give them a ton of time. And so if they survive in my landscape, I tend to recommend them because they are tough as nails, they're tolerant, they do well with a little bit of neglect and those kind of things. So that's what we'll do tonight. And like Phoebe said, we'll take a break about 30 minutes or so into the presentation. To start things off, let's talk about what a perennial is. So tonight we're only focusing on perennials, and these are plants that are herbaceous or leafy, and they come back year after year. Compared to our trees and shrubs, we would consider those to be woody plants. We're not going to focus on woody plants tonight. We're just going to talk about perennials. And we're not going to talk about annuals like geraniums and petunias. Those are plants that live for just one growing season. Your tomatoes, your broccoli, your cauliflower, all of those would be considered annuals. So perennials we plant because there's a ton of diversity. They bloom for a long period and you get a lot of bang for your buck because you plant them once and they come back year after year. The great thing also about perennials is that they tend to have a set bloom time. So this is where you can do your research and start to pair plants together so that you have early spring, summer, fall bloom so that you have interest in color in your garden year round. The benefits are numerous. I absolutely love perennials. I'm a huge tree and shrub nerd as well. I'm actually a tree nerd by training. But perennials really add a lot of pizzazz to the landscape simply because they add texture, they add diversity. Some of them may have fragrance, which is really nice. A lot of them are going to attract pollinators, which when we talk about specific perennials, I'll try to mention. And for those of you battling rabbits or deer, there are also perennials that tend to be less favored by those animals. Although if they're hungry, they're going to try them. That's the bottom line. With perennials, we have lots of different shapes, textures, sizes. We have ground covers, we have tall things. And the benefit too, being in Colorado and looking at Colorado scaping, we really need to make choices that are going to be water friendly. And that's where perennials can come in. So I will not be exclusively talking about natives. We might have some nativars, which are just selections of native plants, but that actually have been introduced as cultivars. So I'll have both options. I'll have those that are introduced through the ornamental horticulture trade. I'll have some natives, some nativars, and it's really just to give you a selection. So what I present tonight is not what you have to plant in your landscape. Again, they're just ideas. And there are thousands of perennials that you can choose from, and it gets a little bit overwhelming. But there is a perennial for every situation in your home landscape, which is also another benefit. When it comes to design, we always recommend that you hydrozone. What that means is that you're going to group like plants with similar water use needs together. So in your vegetable garden, that is going to be one hydrozone. These are plants that are going to need regular irrigation during the summer months. Now, with our Waterwise selections or some of our xeric perennials, they're going to need water to get established, but then they might only need water occasionally, maybe once a month or even less. Sometimes they'll be fine with what Mother Nature provides. So hydrozoning is really important. And if you've ever made the mistake of planting something that needs higher water with something that's lower water, it's really hard to target the irrigation because you're going to overwater one and underwater the other, and no one's going to be happy. So that is why we want to hydrozone, and perennials can mix in with this. So we have perennials that have higher water needs, and we have those that with lower water needs. We also want to think about how the plant grows. So some plants, if you move from a place that is not, if you're not originally from Colorado, if you moved from the Midwest or East Coast or somewhere else, you might have plants in mind where you're like, oh my gosh, that is so invasive. But here in Colorado, because we have less natural water occurring, they may not be as aggressive as other plants. But if you are a generous waterer and you tend to give things a lot more water than they actually need, that's when we can have plants that spread beyond their boundaries. And so there are things that you need to consider. So looking at the plant tag, understanding the plant's growth, and then planning accordingly in your landscape is a big thing. So think about that when you start a design. Also think about the plant's colors and textures. So we're all immediately drawn to color. You know, if you love pink, you might be really attracted to anything with a pink flower. But also think about texture. And I think sometimes texture is one that we don't tend to notice as much. So darker foliage is going to reseed. And these are the plants that have maybe more of a reddish leaf or a chocolate colored leaf. Those are going to reseed versus plants that are more yellow or that chartreuse color. Those are going to pop and they're going to be a lot more noticeable in the landscape. So it's a good thing to have a mixture of both, because if you have everything that's yellow, I made that mistake. I had a whole yellow garden. It's very bright and it's very stimulating, but I didn't have any contrast with some darker colors. So beauty, when you design, is created through that contrast. So think about the leaf color and the flower color when you're pairing plants together. And then the texture is so important. So variegated foliage, I love. I love the brunneras, that's what this is, or Siberian bug loss. The brunneras have these incredible variegation in their leaves. They're like silver and green. Sometimes they might have other colors mixed in. But the texture of the leaf is important. So is it round? Is it like a grass where it's more sword-like? Does it have more dainty foliage? Does it have more chunky foliage? And that's where you can start bringing things in. And a tip that a designer shared with me, which I thought was really helpful, and all of your cell phones can do this, is to take a photo of your garden in black and white and then look at that. So here we have the brunnera with that really cool variegated foliage, and then we have an iris, so those really stout, short, sword-shaped leaves. If we put that into black and white, you can see the differences in the texture. So we have the iris that's very stout, wide leaf, very spiky, and then we have that brunnera, and you can really get the sense of variegation in there. So do that. Like if your garden just seems a little meh, or maybe it needs a little something, taking a photo in black and white can be a really useful tip. And then you can go to the garden center and do the same thing. Take pictures of plants, put them in black and white, and then try to kind of bring them into your current garden or your new garden for some different texture. Now, most of us are gardening in an existing landscape. If you're brand new, you have a brand new house, you get to start from fresh. That's pretty awesome. But a lot of us are living in a space where we already have an established garden or an establishing garden. So here's the thing is that you really want to monitor your garden throughout the season. And this is what you can do during spring and summer. And then as we come into the fall, you can start to add more perennials to your existing landscape. So monitor things. Where are the gaps? Where are all the spring blooming plants? And where do you need some late summer or some fall color added into that landscape bed? And if you have a perennial that you love, you just love something and you want it, don't just plant it in one space. And if it doesn't work there, don't give up. Give it a few tries. So my nemesis plant is the Delosperma, which is ice plant. You might know of it. It's a very common thing. It's a little low growing mat of ground cover, and then it has these really cool, kind of daisy like flowers that sit atop the foliage. And I have honestly tried to grow Delosperma for really every year that I've lived in my house, which is approaching 20 years. And I have not been successful, but I try it every time. And I've tried it in all these different spaces. Well, I tried it last year. It survived the winter, it has survived the summer. And so I might have found my ice plant spot. And I'm so excited about that. But don't give up. So gardening is hard, and how you garden, how you apply water, all of those change. So if you really like something, give it a chance, a time or two or 20 to see if it can establish. So going back to your landscape, look at where you could tuck in plants, look at where maybe you need some color or different texture, and then go to gardens. This is the biggest thing. Visit your neighbors' gardens. If you have a phenomenal gardener on your block, see if you can stop by for an iced tea and just look to see what's in bloom. Or go to your local botanic garden, go down to Denver Botanic and just see what's in bloom, and do that several times during the year. And then write down those names so that you can add them to your own space, especially if it's something you like. And then the other tip is ask your industry partners, go to your garden center, ask master gardeners what their favorite plant of the moment is. And I will guarantee what they say in April is going to be different than what they say in August. So my April plant is very different than what my August plant is right now. So that's also something fun to consider. And when it comes to design, it's hard, right? You go to the garden center, everything looks great. You're looking at plant tags, you can become overwhelmed. So the big thing is make sure, again, hydrozoning, like water needs together, but then also make sure that the plants have similar light use needs as well. So planting something that prefers more shade and then you have full sun, that's not going to work. But people have also made this really easy because they know it's a difficult thing. So Plant Select and Resource Central basically have a plant by number design, and they have several designs available. So if you do buy a garden in a box, which I highly recommend, you get a design with it, and if you have that space, you can mimic exactly what that design is and put the plants in there accordingly. So they will do the work for you. Plant Select, which is a cooperative program with CSU and Denver Botanic Gardens and the green industry, also have designs available. So if hiring a landscape designer is out of question because it's too expensive or it's just not something you want to do at this time, there are designs that are free. And with this one, this design by Lauren Springer, you could just use half of it. So if you don't have this entire space, but you really like the left half, you could just use that or just take pieces of it and then put those plants together. So that's the great thing is use resources that are available, but always do your research about the plants prior to planting so you know what you're getting yourself into. When should you plant? The ideal times is when it's cooler. So planting today, not the best idea. When it's 98 degrees, you're not happy, the plants aren't going to be happy. So ideally, if you could do it in the spring or in the fall, when things are cooler are going to be those ideal times. If you do plant when it's this hot, you do need to be prepared to water. If you are not a dedicated waterer during the summer months or you don't have time to babysit new plants, I would avoid planting during the hottest times of the year and try to push it back to fall, or you can wait till spring. So I say the next several weeks will be ideal times. I think after we get through this heat spell, depending on where you live, it's going to be it will start getting a little bit cooler, which is good. So hopefully by the end of August into September, hopefully we'll get some cooler weather and not be in this constant string of above 90, just because it's going to take a lot to water. When you plant in the spring, these are your considerations. So everything is available. The shelves are stocked. They're getting trucks daily at your garden centers. So everything is fresh, everything is fun, everything is new. You're fresh and new. By this time, I feel like gardeners are kind of bedraggled. They're kind of tired. They're kind of like not necessarily willing to admit that they're looking forward to the first frost, but it's not the worst thing to think about. So spring is just, a time to be refreshed. We're coming off of winter. It's been tough. It's gray. It's bleak, and you're excited to get back into the garden. Also, spring tends to be the time where we get more consistent moisture. This was a great year for that. So it was pretty dry most of last fall into the winter. And then in June, the skies opened. Again, this depends on where you're living, but we had a pretty good moisture content early on in the spring. The other good thing is that you have time to get those plants established before the winter. That's a big thing. So if they can get their roots established, if they can get some growth into the ground, they're going to likely survive better than fall planting. The weather is cooler. It tends to be a little bit more consistent. You're not getting those fluctuation temperatures quite as much. And so the general rule of thumb is that when you're able to dig your soil, depending on where you live, you can start planting. That includes your perennials, your trees, and your shrubs. And then you'll need to use some type of mulch to help with moisture retention. If you want to wait or if you're gearing up to plant this fall, the great thing is there are sales and discounts. We love a good sale. So plants will start to be discounted because the garden centers don't want to overwinter things. So the more that they can sell to you this fall, the better it is. Our soils also stay very warm into the fall. So a lot of times, especially in the Front Range, your soils won't freeze generally until sometime in November. So if you get them in the ground, they're going to have several weeks to put on new growth, get roots established so that they can survive the winter better. The bummer of fall planting is that selection may not be as ideal. You might not have as many plants available, and things don't always look great. They're tired, they're kind of flopping over, but if you can see the beauty in what they can be, fall planting is just fine. The other thing is that you can spend a lot of time observing what those plants look like before you commit and then plant them into the fall. What is your final deadline? It just depends on where you live. I don't know why I have September 2022 on this slide, but hey, we'll use it. It's okay. If you're in the mountain community, so I would say if you're above like 6,500 feet, you're going to aim to plant by the end of August. Now that will depend. The higher up in elevation you go, the sooner you need to get plants into the ground. So if you're at 8, 9, 10,000 feet, your season is rapidly coming to a close. So make sure that you're planting. If you're in the Front Range below 6, 5,000 feet, you'll want to get things planted ideally by the middle to late September. So again, it's early August right now. We have like probably 6 weeks at least in the Front Range until we need to absolutely get things in the ground. But the sooner you can, the better. Just keep in mind those temperatures because it's so hot. And when you plant something that's going to wilt, it's not going to be great. So just make sure you have irrigation available. When you're planting, you're going to likely have a plant in a container. We don't get bare root plants at this time of year. That's a spring thing. So they're going to be in a container, and likely you're going to have a mass of roots when you pull that plant out of the plastic pot. So what you can do is kind of, rip it apart and be ruthless with this. Okay, don't feel bad that you're tearing the roots. This is okay, and the plant is going to be fine. I promise you, the plant is going to be fine. Every time you break those roots, a new root is going to form. So it's going to fork and form these new roots. So that's what you want to do. If you take the plant from the container and it's a mass of roots and you put it right in the ground, it's unlikely that you're going to get great root establishment. Breaking it apart or teasing those roots apart is what's going to encourage new root growth. Then plant it at the exact same level that it was in the container. So whatever is the top of the plant, make sure that's your soil, your existing soil surface. And yes, you could get a soil test, but I would say it's really not necessary for most perennials, and you really don't need to fertilize at planting. Here's the thing is that our nurseries and garden centers are already fertilizing these plants, A, to keep them looking really good, and B, to get them through production faster. So during their entire growth cycle, from the moment they start as a small plug or a cutting, they are getting fertility. So when you get them in the landscape, there's going to be fertilizer in the plant system that is going to help it get established. So fertilizer at planting generally isn't a necessary thing. Now, with amendments, now this is something that you may do. It really depends on where you're planting them. Natives and a lot of the xeric or the Waterwise perennials, they don't need heavily amended soil. If you are tearing up part of your lawn that's been in lawn for 10 or 15 years, or even if you have a new landscape, there's going to be nutrients there that are going to support plant growth. Now, if it's a blank slate, brand new home, the soils have been stripped, they have been sold off to the nearest bidder because they take all the good stuff and leave you with what's left, then you can add some organic matter, about an inch or two on the top, and you'll want to till it in to work it into the soils. But if you have an existing landscape, even 5 years old, you're going to have some decent organic matter. This is a portion of my landscape that I renovated last year. So this was all turf. I killed it off and then I'm going to plant. So I actually left the dead turf in place because I know it's going to provide excellent organic matter. So I didn't remove the turf, left it in place, planted right into it. And I know that I have really decent organic matter for those plants going forward. And then when you plant, don't space them close together. I know they're little. I know that they don't look like much, but you don't want to crowd them because you're going to have problems later on. So make sure that you give them the space they need based on the planting chart and how big they get. That's according to the tag. So space them out. So don't plant them too close and then regret it later and have to do division and everything else. Okay, so caring for newly planted perennials. The first year, that first season, you are going to have to water them like you would any other plant. They need your help in getting established. If they're native, if they're xeric, even though after establishment they can go with less water, that first season they're going to need regular water. Now, what regular water means is just going to depend on your conditions and your soil. So your finger is going to become your best friend because you're going to poke it around the plants. Okay, it feels wet. I don't need to water right now. Or you're poking around, oh, it feels dry. I should give it some water. It might mean that you have to water 3 days a week. It might mean that if you have more sandy soils that you have to water every day to get things established. Also, the plant is going to talk to you. If it's getting wilty, it might be a sign of too much or too little water. So again, checking the soil. So really watch your watering. I have seen landscapes where drip irrigation is placed next to the plants and the soils are so compacted that they don't drain. So then the plants are sitting in standing water. That's leading to root rot, that's leading to all sorts of issues. So really monitor your watering when you're getting things established. And then mulch. You'll have to find a mulch that works for you. It could be wood, it could be rock, it could be squeegee, which is really just crusher fines. So if you haven't heard of squeegee, it's not pea gravel. So pea gravel is round. And if you've ever walked on pea gravel, you know how it kind of slips under your feet. Squeegee is usually used or can be used for pathways because it compacts down, but it still allows for porosity, which is really good. With any mulch, whether it's rock, whether it's squeegee, you need at least 4 inches of mulch. Now, wood in a fire prone area is not a good idea, so you need to find an alternative. Rock, not the best alternative for some situations. So think about the plants, think about what you're growing, and then find a mulch that works for you. But mulch is going to help prevent weeds, it's going to help with soil moisture retention. It's going to do a lot of really good things for your plants, but there's not a one mulch fits all. So you really have to make decisions based on where you're gardening and what your priorities are. Overwintering. So if you plant this fall, then you need to make sure your plants survive the winter. So mulch is number one. Mulch is going to help protect the crown of the plant. And the crown of the plant is where the leaves come up from. So the roots are one thing, but the crown also needs to be protected. So you might add some additional mulch around the plant, kind of bury it, once temperatures are consistently cold. So this is after the soils freeze, and then once we get some consistent moisture. Then provide water as long as you can into the fall. So keep on watering. The plant's not going to be growing a lot, but if the soils are warm, you're going to get root growth. So do monitor how much water you're giving your plants, but keep watering as long as you can. And then in the winter, when we get those beautiful 65-degree sunny days that we all live for because it's Colorado, you might consider also watering your plants, especially your newly planted plants, on those really nice warm winter days. Then in the spring, as you start to see new growth, you can start to pull that mulch back and you can cut your plants back and then go on with your life next spring and your plant should do really well. So if you plant in the fall, plan to continue with regular irrigation for at least a year. So if you plant in August, make sure you're doing regular irrigation for at least a year. And if you spring plant, you'll do all summer and then see how things are going the following spring. Hopefully that makes sense. Also remember that perennials take time to establish. The first couple of years, they may not do much. You might not get great blooms. You might get a lot of foliage, but you might not get any flowers. So the first year, they're going to put resources into establishing their roots. The second year, they'll start to put on some top growth. And then the third year is really where they start to shine. So patience is key. And this goes back to, again, do not overplant your area. Make sure that you're giving those plants space. So a 4-inch perennial, you will be shocked at how quickly it can take up space just in 2 or 3 years. So don't plant them too close together. And remember to have some patience with this process. So I wanted to show you a couple pictures of the renovation I did. Last spring, I made a decision to remove the turf. I have this outbuilding in my backyard and behind it was grass. No one really used the grass. The beagles, these are juniper and maple, they used the grass, but I didn't love it. It wasn't really useful to me. I had to mow it. And so I decided to kill off that section of grass. Now, I'm not going to go into the process or the steps of how I did this. And if you want more information, you can email me. But I did kill it fully before I planted. So back in June, I started the killing process in May. And then in June, I got my garden in a box, which is phenomenal. Staged it out and then had everything planted by the next day. So again, the grass was dead. I planted directly into the dead turf. So I mowed it really short. I scalped it down as best I could. And then I planted directly into the dead turf. And then I topped it with wood mulch, which is my preference in my landscape in Windsor. So there are the planting photos in June of last year. There it is with the beautiful mulch cover, again, about 4 inches thick. So I just mulched right on top of the dead turf. And there it is in August of last year. So I took a photo because now we're in August of this year. So that was 1 year ago. And here we go for a year's growth. So I will say this was pretty successful. The Artemisia, which are these bigger ones right here, they were just those 4-inch plants, so not that much, but look at how much they've grown just in one season. You can see some of the growth from the ornamental grasses. There were some sedums in my box, the Delosperma, which has, I hopefully found its place, I hope. But this section is beautiful. It is full sun. It is attracting pollinators, and I could not be more happy with this renovation. And I have all that grass that I don't have to mow. So the beagles still have their grass in the center of the lawn, but I have this beautiful flower-filled pollinator garden in the back of my yard. So that's a year. So next year, it will probably be even bigger, more filled in. So again, don't overplant. That is the key. With maintenance, let's say you need to move or divide something. So let's say you do made the mistake and you need to divide some plants because they've outgrown their space. Depending on when they bloom is when you would ideally divide them or move them. So if they bloom early in the spring, you would wait until they finish blooming, then you can divide them or move them. If they bloom later on in the summer, you can actually do spring division or moving. Anytime you dig up a plant, whether you divide it or you decide to move it, you treat it as a brand new plant, which means you have to give it regular water to get established because you're digging it up, you're disturbing it, and then it needs that water to reestablish its root system. So keep that in mind. Do you have to divide your perennials? No, you don't. If they get too big for their space, that's a good reason. If you want to share plants with friends, that's another reason. If flowering is just really poor, this happens a lot with iris. If iris get overcrowded, or if you're getting that weird dead spot in the center of your ornamental grasses, that is another good reason to divide your plants. But you can have perennials in your garden for years and years and years, and you never need to divide them. So don't feel as if it's something you have to do. Really base it on the individual plants and what they're telling you and what they look like. If you do need to divide, again, depending on when they bloom is when you want to divide them or move them. So spring blooming, the early ones that bloom in the spring, wait until after they flower to move them later on in the summer. And then if they're summer blooming, like our Shasta daisies, our coral bells, our rudbeckia, you can actually move those early on in the spring. So the process is pretty easy. Dig it up. Dig up as much of the plant as you can. Remove anything dead. So if you have a dead center of your ornamental grasses, throw that out, and then keep the sections that are alive, and you can chunk those up into pieces. You can make as many pieces as you want. They can be bigger sections, they can be smaller. It's just going to depend on what you're going to be doing with them. If you're sharing with friends, bigger section is nice. But you can also give, just a smaller section as well. So cut it up and then replant it one back in the space where you originally dug it, and then water it as you would a new perennial. So the other sections you can put into the landscape, water those to get established. The ones that you give to friends and family, make sure you're telling people, water this as if it's a new plant. Pretty easy process. I will say that sometimes perennials don't like to be divided. They may not be that successful following division, but it's always worth a try, especially if it's just a plant that's kind of lagging or not performing well in the landscape. Moving on to fall or spring cleanup, really depends on you. Depends on how excited and energetic you are when it comes to fall. You can cut everything back in the fall. That's absolutely fine. You can leave some things standing. That is also good. They might catch more snow. They're a little bit more attractive. Sometimes if you cut everything back, the landscape looks a little bleak and kind of boring, so you might leave some stuff. It just depends on what your interests are. Sometimes the flowers, the spent flowers, can provide food for birds or nesting materials. And then when it comes to pollinators too, sometimes the pollinators are going to overwinter in that plant tissue. So you could leave the majority of your plant not cut back in the fall and then do it later on in the spring, later spring. If you had any disease pressure or things like that, you would want to cut back the foliage and throw that in the trash. You wouldn't want that to potentially overwinter in your garden. So again, it depends on the kind of gardener you are. It's not a one size fits all. You can do part of your garden, you can leave part of your garden, find what works for you and what energy you have. Okay, so questions, and Phoebe, I have them pulled up, or if you want to um, read any, if there's some linkages, because I'm sure that you've taken a look. So
Yeah, for sure. Some people were asking if a wildflower mix was a good option. So that would obviously be, I'm assuming from seed is what they're talking about. And I'm
yeah,
also
if you
assuming that was in a, um,
previous slide,
yeah,
probably.
yeah.
Yeah. If you want to do wildflowers, it will really depend on what you plan to sow. So some of them might do better with a fall stratification, so they need that cold to do well. Some might be better in the spring. So it really depends on what you're planting and what your goals are with that. But yes, you could absolutely add wildflowers to any existing landscape.
Cool. Someone just picked up in Steamboat. Yay. That was our first pickup of this late summer season. And was asking, I assumed I needed to plant everything in the next 2 weeks. It's a little bit hot now. Should I plan to water more than recommended?
If you don't get them in the ground, so a lot of these plants have been growing in their container for the majority of the summer. So if you want to wait until it's ideal for you, Steamboat's a little bit higher in elevation. So yeah, if you do put them in the ground and it's still really hot at the time you plant, you might need to water more. Again, depends on your soils, depends on the plants, but just keep an eye out with how much you're giving them because you don't want to give them too much, and just monitor as you're able.
Yeah. And Allison, do you recommend so we had like a little flyer just for some of the higher altitude locations. And I had the average first frost was like early September-ish. And we were giving recommendation of like ideally you're getting them in the ground so they have about a month before any possibility of frost. Is that how you would recommend as well?
So, the frosts are going to be the foliage killing temperature, but the soils are going to stay warm. So
Okay.
that's the thing, is that, yes, you can have a frost. The plants aren't going to love it, but you do want to keep that soil warm. So if you know in Steamboat Springs or in the Front Range, kind of when generally your soils are going to freeze, go back at least 6 weeks. 8 is ideal, and plant at that time. And
Okay.
mulch will help you too. Mulch will help buffer some of those cold temperatures that you get. Snow, if you get snow, it actually will help keep soil, our heat and the soil in the ground as well. Snow is not a bad thing.
Okay. Okay. So 6 to 8 weeks from when
The
soils freeze.
soils freeze. Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Yes.
Great. A couple of people are asking how you killed your lawn, but you mentioned to email you
Yeah. Please email
about
me.
that.
That's a
Different
conversation
topic.
for another day. It's complicated
For,
and long, and I will tell you.
for sure, for sure. Um, Squeegee. So when you're mulching with squeegee versus wood mulch, is there a difference in how close you can get to the crown of the plant from wood mulch to squeegee, or is it the same that you want to kind of leave a little bit of space?
I think it's the same. Just leave a little bit of a gap, because then anytime you add something to the surface, water is going to move through that surface differently. So if you're adding squeegee or wood mulch, you'll want to make sure that you're watering the plant itself. So plant, you're going to plant and then you have mulch, and keeping it at just a couple inches away, even an inch away, will make sure that when you do water, it's going into the root system of the plant and not just spreading out in the landscape itself.
For sure. Stephanie, I think we answered this question, just we were going into division after talking about if you happen to plant too close together. So I hope that answered your question there about how to kind of rectify that. Let's see. Um, how helpful are root stimulators when initially planting or transplanting
That's a
plants?
great question. I would say they are loosely useful.
Okay.
Root stimulate, I would say. So if you, yes, we have all these add-on products that you can buy from the nurseries and garden centers, and I'm not saying that they're not useful, but your biggest limiting factor with planting anything in Colorado is going to be water. So make sure that you have irrigation ready and that you're committed to that. So root stimulators might do some good. They're not going to be useful long term for the plant. So getting the plant healthy from establishment is going to be more important.
Gotcha. Sorry, I'm just typing in an answer here.
So I see a couple questions about bindweed. This is not a talk on weed control. Mulch. Mulch and persistence is going to be your biggest thing. So I think a lot of times where we get weed pressure is where we have mulch failure. So again, that 4 inches, 5 inches of mulch, whether it's rock, whether it's squeegee, is going to be a big thing. We don't recommend in extension any use of weed fabric because it generally doesn't work and it generally isn't porous to allow water to get into the root system of plants. And you might notice that weeds grow on top of mulch a lot of times. So with bindweed, yes, you can use herbicides, but persistence, pulling, hoeing, digging, and then having competition is going to be what you can finally control bindweed with. But it is not easy and it's going to take you a lot of effort. There is no easy solution, unfortunately.
Sure. Someone asked, how do we know when the soils freeze?
So the soils freeze. I mean, yes, you could. It's really when they're frozen. You can't dig in them. It's hard to say. So it's when we have those nighttime temperatures that are cooling where they start to go down. I don't have a great answer for that.
Yeah.
But if the longer it's warm in the fall, so if we have, even if we have a cold snap where there's a couple nights where we hit freezing, the soils are going to stay warm. The longer we get cold and stay cold, that is when the soils are going to start to freeze.
Yeah, no, that
Hopefully
makes
that makes
sense.
sense.
Yeah. I honestly, Jody, I had the same question. I was like, because in some places it's hard to dig into the ground in the middle of the summer because
It
it's so
is.
dry and like come
Right.
back. Um, okay, great. Um,
For Maryland, what perennials will grow where you have removed junipers? Anything. There's nothing that junipers would leave in the soil that would cause detrimental effects to future plants.
Great. Love that answer. I feel like we kind of talked about a lot of these. Someone is asking about like enhancing soil for new areas and if like things like planting clover or cover crops is successful and like kind of what is the best time to do something like that.
So, using clover for the benefits of the nitrogen and things like that. Remember that clover is a perennial crop. So if you do get clover established, you will then be potentially battling clover as you get whatever else you're planting to establish. Now, there are cover crops that are annuals that you could seed and then kill them back. We do this a lot in vegetable gardens. But if you're able to use wood mulch, as that mulch starts to decompose, that's going to add organic matter and that's what's going to help benefit your soils. And if it's a new area, I don't know if it's like new landscape area or new home area, but that's going to depend a lot too. But I think like we don't give our soils enough credit. So instead of just poo-pooing our soils and saying, oh, they're terrible, oh, they're clay, there's a lot of benefit to it. So yes, clay can be hard to get water to move through, but clay also holds nutrients better. And so clay has a lot of benefits. Talk to someone who has to grow in sandy soils, and it's a whole other challenge of how much you have to water and how little organic matter exists in different soils. So yes, our soils are difficult, but try to work with what you have, and trying to change your soils is going to largely be frustrating and potentially unsuccessful. So embrace it and find plants that work in those situations. So you might need to try plants a few times to see if they will grow in your soils. Not every plant is going to be successful in every landscape in Colorado.
For sure. Okay. A couple of folks just asking about like types of mulch. So straw, cedar mulch. If you obviously use wood mulch, but if you have recommendations on types of mulch.
Cedar is fine. You can use cedar. Straw in a perennial landscape probably doesn't make a lot of sense. That would be better for a vegetable garden area. If you do use straw in any of your landscape, make sure it's weed free. Otherwise, you are going to have weeds growing from the straw. But, but I'm wondering, Phoebe, if we could move on, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think we're good. The rest I'm gonna
Okay.
poke away at some that I can answer.
Okay. And for those of you who have questions, again, my email will be at the end. Phoebe can type it into the chat. Please reach out to me because I know that there's a ton of questions and we're not able to get to them, but I want you to get the content as well. So, okay, so we're going to move on to types of perennials, and hopefully this will be a little bit inspiring and hopefully give you some ideas as well. So the first thing I want to call attention to, I mentioned this program, Plant Select, which is this cooperative program of introducing plants for the semi-arid West. So this is Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Montana, those areas that have these inconsistent periods of moisture, so tend to have low precipitation. All of these plants that are introduced are trialed and demonstrated. So they're in demonstration gardens across Colorado. So Grand Junction along the Front Range up in Wyoming. And then the best of the best are then introduced into the market. And there's a ton of perennials that you can consider for your landscape. So the website is plantselect.org. Check it out. There's also designs available that you could use and mimic for your own landscape. They have a find a plant feature where if you have a troublesome spot that you can't get anything to grow, you can say, I want a perennial. I want it to be 24 inches high. I want it to bloom in the summer, and I want it to attract pollinators. You can actually select those parameters and it will spit out plants that potentially match that space. So plantselect.org is a really good program. And a lot of the Resource Central Garden in a Box plants are from Plant Select, which is really cool. The first thing with perennials, and I mentioned this, is light. So it is hard to garden in Colorado because we are obviously closer to the sun in elevation. And if you're up in a mountain community, you're that much closer. So 8,000 feet, 8,500 feet. So light is going to be different. Full sun in general is going to be anything that gets more than 6 hours of direct summer sun during the day. So this is probably your west facing landscape, your south facing landscape. So not only will it get morning sun, it's going to get that intense afternoon sun as well. Then we have light shade and partial shade. Shade comes in based on where your structures are located. So if it's the north side on the house, your house may shade that area, or maybe underneath a tree. And trees are going to give off different types of shade. So a honey locust with its small leaves may give dappled shade versus a spruce or a pine tree is going to give very dense shade because it's continuously blocking all sun. Full shade and then deep shade. Deep shade is like almost impossible to grow anything. There's no direct sun, and I mean, this is a place where you just use mulch. That's really your best solution, because trying to get anything to grow without any light is going to be very difficult. So when you look at your plant tag and you look at your landscape, this is kind of where you start to make decisions. You know, is it full blazing sun most of the day during the summer, or is it morning sun but afternoon shade? And that would be more of the partial shade feature. So look at those plant tags, and again, trial and error. I know that we don't like to spend money, and I know we don't like to have failures in our landscape, but sometimes we have to do that to see if there's a plant that can survive in a certain situation. All right, so Plant Select. These are my bias selections. These are the best plants that I love from Plant Select. You may love them, you may hate them. So the first one I hope you love. This is golden candles. And I've shown this picture a couple times because this is a phenomenal plant. It is a drive down the street, stop the car, screech to a halt, and just look at this plant. It is a 50-mile-an-hour plant because it looks like a plant that deserves all the attention. It's these bright yellow flowers. It is in the pea family, which is really good. And it's beautiful. Hardy to zone 3. So you up in the mountains can grow this plant, which is really great. And it also blooms really early. So this is a plant that comes out of the ground and then it blooms April and May in the Front Range. Will bloom a little bit later if you're higher in elevation, and it is just awesome. I mean, look at how excited Juniper is to be near the golden candles. That is Juniper's typical face. So she really actually is excited. So about 3 feet high, looks a lot like a plant that I'm blanking on, but I will remember in a little bit that it's a phenomenal plant. So golden candles is one that you should consider. Penstemon is another great plant, and there are so many penstemons available from Plant Select that I cannot possibly list them all, but there's a penstemon for everyone. There's a ton of native penstemon. So when you're buying your plants, make sure, first of all, that they are going to be hardy for Colorado. Not all are going to survive, or they may survive for a couple years and then kind of fade away. The height is going to vary. We have the pine leaf penstemon, which is what you can see here. They tend to attract really lovely pollinators. They tend to be deer resistant, and they do well in really poor soil. So if you have a gravelly location or a place where things just, kind of don't do well, penstemon could fit that bill. So a couple that I wanted to call your attention to. The first is Carolyn's Hope. This is about 18 inches tall, and Carolyn's Hope was named for a breeder's wife named Carolyn who was battling breast cancer. The cool thing about this plant is that some of the proceeds of this plant will actually go to breast cancer research. So it's that beautiful pink color that is so signature with breast cancer awareness. Blooms usually around June and has a really long bloom set, like several weeks, where it looks great. Another one is Pikes Peak Purple. So there are purples, there are pinks, there are oranges, there are so many different beautiful penstemons. And again, the pollinators, you can see how the bee has shoved himself well into the flower and is just enjoying life. So Pikes Peak Purple is another one that gets about 18 inches tall. That was introduced a long time ago, more than 20 years ago, and is still on the market and still a great selection. The next plant is Silver Heels Horehound. I recently discovered this plant. It's been around for a really long time, but I recently discovered it and I love it. It is amazing. So this plant looks beautiful all year round. It looks great in the winter. It looks great in the spring. Right now it looks a little tired because it's bloomed, and so it's a little bit bleh, but it will recover in the fall. So this is a really, really cool plant. I think the foliage is attractive. So it's this kind of silvery whitish color. The flowers are yellow and they sit atop the plant. I think the flowers are not as cool as the foliage itself, but you can see how finely textured this plant is. And draped over a rock or in a rock garden, it could be beautiful, but I just have it as a mat right near my front door, and it's doing really well. And it took the snow load and everything else, which is really great. So here are some other pictures, and you know what? I actually have the wrong name on this plant, which is really embarrassing. This is partridge feather. Sorry, this is partridge feather, but Silver Heels Horehound is this plant. Both are great. Okay, so plant partridge feather. Silver Heels Horehound is another ground cover. Very fuzzy leaves, so kind of almost like a miniature lamb's ear, really tiny, small leaves that collect the dew. Another great one for a rock garden, so it can kind of cascade down. So that was a 2-for-1. So we had the partridge feather on the previous slide, misnamed. This is the Silver Heels Horehound. This is what you get for doing a presentation very late at night when you should not be doing that. So my apologies.
Allison, real quick, I
Yeah,
just want to make sure there was one comment that people weren't seeing the pictures of the flowers. Can I just get some folks to mention in the Q&A if you're able to see the photos now or not? Because I can see them just fine. I just wanted to check that other folks. Okay, people can see them. Great. Sorry about that, Betty. I'm not sure how to help you on that end, but you'll get a copy of the slides in the email. So sorry, Allison, go ahead.
no, that's okay. Betty, you might log off and log back on. That might fix things. And I did see a comment that golden candles is invasive. Again, these are xeric plants, so too much water can encourage them to escape their original habit and things like that. So do watch your water. That is the biggest thing. These are all xeric water-wise perennials, and so they shouldn't get too much water. So the next one is moon carrot. Obsessed with moon carrot, my favorite plant at the moment. So if you ask me, hey Allison, what is your favorite plant right now? I would say moon carrot because it is so cool and so unusual for anything else that we have. So it has this light blue, kind of a tarnished blue, carrot-like foliage. And then it gets these crazy, weird flowers on top of it. And it's amazing that the foliage can support the flowers because they're so heavy. This is one that will attract every pollinator in the nearby vicinity, which is really cool. So the flowers are these little tight little white kind of pinkish balls that sit atop, like they're corms that sit atop the foliage. And it's blooming now, which is amazing. So I have seen this. I know some of you are having trouble finding plants in the trade. I have seen this in the trade. I will say in a container, it is not going to love life. So this is one that you have to give it a chance. So you're going to buy it based on its name and you're going to give it some patience to get established. So moon carrot, I love. I think it's the coolest thing. So here it is in the landscape. You can see it paired with some ornamental grasses. There's that blue foliage color. You could pair it with some sage or something. You could pair it with the partridge feather or the silverhair's horehound, and it would do quite well if you have it in the back of it because it's going to get taller. So that is moon carrot. Loving it right now. Great pollinator plant. The next one is little blue stem. This is Schizocurium scoparium, and little blue stem is a native to Colorado. What has been cool is that they have selected cultivars that do really well in the landscape and that might have better features than the straight species of little blue stem. So if you drive out on the Eastern Plains through Pawnee Buttes, you will likely see little blue stem and big blue stem, its cousin. Little blue stem is known to have really nice fall color, which is great. So then our plant breeders looked at that and said, oh, well, maybe we could introduce plants that have better fall color from selections of native species. And that's what they did. So this is a plant, the grass gets about 36 inches tall. It's a warm season species, and so it will take a while to warm up and start to grow in the spring. So somewhere around June, you're going to start to see growth, and then it's going to go dormant with the first frost. So very much a sun-loving, heat-loving plant. So a couple cultivars to consider. This is standing ovation. And you can see it in the summer with this bluish green color, and then you can see it in the fall with those flecks of red. So I know a lot of times we look to trees or shrubs to give us fall color. There's a lot of perennials that you could consider as well, and standing ovation is one of those. There's thoughts that maybe it could be used as a turf species because it actually mows well. We haven't looked at that, but it's an interesting thought. So again, standing ovation, and it was called this because it doesn't lodge or fall over in the winter when it gets snow loads. So standing ovation means it stands nice and tall. This is one you can leave in your garden throughout the winter for winter interest. And it will actually keep some of that red color well into November, December, which is great. Blaze is another one. So Blaze is not a plant select introduction, but it is a little blue stem and it's worthy of attention because look at that orange and then look at this orange tabby. I mean, that's like the perfect picture. So Blaze, instead of being the red color, is going to have more of those shades of orange. So again, that bluish green color during the summer months. And then as the weather starts to cool, the anthocyanins start to move in, and you're going to get those orangey colors as well. So again, there's a lot of different little blue stems that you can consider. They're not all plant select, but there's some really, really good options out there. Moving into perennials for dry shade. This is the tough space to grow, right? If you have dry shade, where again you're getting pretty consistent 6+ hours of shade during the day, maybe it's under a tree, maybe it's near the home, and it doesn't get consistent moisture, really hard to grow plants in this area. So here are a few options for you. The first is hellebores. This is Lenten rose. Lenten rose is one of the very first plants to bloom in the spring. It is named accordingly because it tends to bloom around Lent. That will depend on the time or the year that we have, but it tends to bloom early. I have seen it bloom as early as February and then into March. So even earlier than a lot of the crocus, which is considered one of the best pollinator plants for some of our native and honeybees that come out. So hellebores are beautiful. They tend to have more muted colors, so they're not really bright and showy. They tend to be more of these dusky tones of kind of roses and maybe some creams and things like that. But these are such a beautiful plant. So they pop up early, they bloom, and then when it gets hot, they kind of fade away. You don't generally see them. A little bit like a bleeding heart, where they do their thing, and then when it gets hot, they peace out. They don't want to have anything to do with the hot temperatures. And there's been a lot of breeding going into the Lenten rose. So Merlin was one that was the best ofs from the CSU perennial trials, and there are several different options. Here's another one. This is a whitish variety, but again, they bloom so early, and it is such a welcome sight after a really difficult winter to see something blooming and life happening in the garden, which is nice. Winter Bells is another best of from the CSU perennial trials. So this one tends to have a little bit more pink. It almost reminds me of a southern magnolia, if that's something you're familiar with, where it has kind of that white flower with some pink undertones to it. And these are not tall plants. They're maybe 18, 24 inches max in height. So again, a little smaller. So put them where you can see them and enjoy them during the early part of the spring. Another dry shade plant is Siberian bugloss. So we met this when we were talking about variegated foliage. Siberian bugloss is a super tough ground cover. Now, this is one, full disclosure, this is one that if you overwater it or give it too much moisture, it is going to fill in its space, aka be aggressive, more so than you want. So do be careful with this one. What I love about the Brunnera, or the Siberian bugloss, are these beautiful, like little blue flowers. Like it's a true blue flower, which is amazing. And it sits atop the foliage. They tend to bloom somewhere around June, May, June, somewhere in that neighborhood. The regular Brunnera, the plain old Brunnera, is really beautiful because it's a nice, really dark green color. But they have done a ton of work in breeding this. So this is Alchemy Silver. And if this just doesn't knock your socks off, I don't know what does. I actually find the flowers on this one to be distracting. I like just the foliage. It a little bit reminds me of a caladium, which is a shade-loving bulb that we can plant. But it's absolutely beautiful. So this was in the CSU perennial trials, and it was selected as one of the best of. So looking at dry shade, sometimes we need something that's going to brighten the space. And if you have that white or that silver color, it's really going to lighten up the space quite a bit. So there's a good option for dry shade. An ornamental grass that will do well are the dwarf blue fescues. These are cute little, tiny little sea urchin-like grasses. Usually they're no more than like 6 to 10 inches tall. So they're really cute, really compact. They have amazing names like sea urchin, and this is Elijah Blue that I'm showing you. So the fescues tend to do well in shade. This is true for our turf fescues as well as our ornamental fescues. So they can take this dry shade area. They do get a flower, not super ornamental or attractive. It's just kind of a straw colored flower, but the foliage is where they're at. Now, I will say the one detriment is that they kind of sometimes grow weird. So instead of being this nice mound, they kind of grow off to the side. And I have found that rabbits do like them, which is too bad. I've also found my beagles to nest in them, which is also too bad. But if you have the location and you're looking for a grass that can tolerate some shade, the dwarf blue fescues can do really well. Blue whiskers is another one that you can consider. And bugleweed, so this is a juga. This is another one that if you are from the Midwest or the East Coast, this is a potential invasive for you. Doesn't tend to be a problem in Colorado because again, we're growing them in dry shade. But this plant can grow with stolons, so those are those above ground roots. And if it does get moisture, it could easily become a little too aggressive for spaces. But in the right situation with the right amount of water that you're providing to it, it can stay a nice compact mat of really cool foliage. So a couple to consider, chocolate chip. What a great name. You can see how it has these flecks of kind of darker burgundy with this light green, and it will tend to fill in a gap. And then burgundy glow, I'm on the fence about. I like that it's a little more muted, but to me, it also looks like it might have some powdery mildew because it tends to have that coating on it. So it's not that shiny foliage compared to the chocolate chip. But, you know, again, if it works for you, I think that's great. There's a lot of different ajuga that you can consider and far more named cultivars that are available to you that are good options. But again, really good for dry shade locations to kind of form that mat and have some areas that it will cover so you don't get weed pressure. And then I put in hardy plumbago. Plumbago could be a sun plant, but it also can do well in shade. And what I like about it is the versatility. So it does well in shade, but it can do well in sun. The flowers are phenomenal. Again, that really beautiful blue color that we just don't get. The foliage is dark green. This is one though that again gets really nice fall colors. So there it is in the fall. You can still see remnants of those pink or not pink, purplish blue flowers with that beautiful red fall color. I think that's just awesome. Actually, since I started seeing this, now I'm seeing it everywhere. And I feel like it's a little bit of an old-fashioned perennial. It's been around for a really long time, tends to do great in neglected locations. I see it a lot in older landscapes. But that fall color is really great. So as a ground cover, can be a really good option for dry shade. Nice fall color, beautiful flowers. What more do you want in a plant? It has all the characteristics. Those are dry shade. Moving to hot and dry. So these are full sun, west facing, south facing, baking landscape plants that will perform and do well. And it does include lavender because I saw that was one of the questions. So the first one is platinum sage. Now I could do an entire talk on all of the different sages available. So there's so many salvias that you could add to your landscape that it's like you could do every plant in a salvia and you would have great diversity. You would have really good pollinators, and you would have a really long season of bloom as well. Different colors in the flowers. So salvia is great. The one thing with salvia is that if you tend to overwater, sometimes it's going to flop and fall over in the middle. So it could be from wind. I've seen that happen, but generally it's because it's getting too much moisture. And so it just kind of tends to split open and fall over. So do watch your water with most of the salvias. They just don't want too much. This salvia, this sage in particular, is going to have this really beautiful kind of silvery white dense foliage. And then it has these beautiful purple blooms that are going to sit up erect over the foliage itself. So the reason I like it, two reasons. One, I really enjoy the foliage. That silvery leaf color is really attractive. And it's going to look good even when it's not in flower. And then the flowers just add to it as well. Also an amazing pollinator plant. Only about 12 inches tall, so it's a smaller salvia. Now again, in the genus Salvia, there's going to be a lot of diversity. Some are going to be taller, some are going to be shorter. This just has different characteristics. A lot of the salvia will also rebloom if you deadhead them. So after all of the flowers or most of the flowers are spent and they're starting to wither, you can go in and whack this back by half. And that's a botanical horticultural term, whack it back, just cut it back by about half. You might get a second set of blooms later on in the summer, which is a really good thing. Also tends to be deer resistant. So there are those typical salvia flowers. That's what they look like. Here it is partnered with, I think it's yarrow. No, I don't think that's yarrow, but you could partner it with yarrow. There we have some poppies in the background. So again, that purple yellow is an amazing combination. The purple red is another beautiful combination. So again, kind of think about the time of bloom, what else is in bloom, and then pair those two together, which is going to be really attractive. Other plants for hot, dry locations are going to be your sedums, or sometimes they're called stone crops. They love it hot and dry. So if it is in a perpetually moist or too wet site, your sedums are not going to do well. These are succulents. They're succulents that love hot and dry conditions. They are very tolerant of most soil types, including those that are pretty bad, rocky, no nutrients, compacted. So again, it's going to be more of a soil moisture issue to get this plant to survive than anything else. And sedums are going to range in height. So we have the ground cover sedums, which are great, but we also have maybe ones that are about knee high in terms of diversity in this plant family, which is great. The flowers are attractive to bees. The flowers can be distracting depending on the size of the plant and how it grows. So if it's a ground cover, sometimes the flowers may sit above the canopy. It may not be as attractive. The foliage is going to be better, but you could prune those back or just leave them. With sedums, you're going to water to get them established and then just let them go. These are plants that don't need a lot of supplemental moisture, if any, and they're going to do fine with what Mother Nature provides. Some of them are going to have spectacular blooms. So one of the perennial sedums that have been around forever is Autumn Joy. Autumn Joy is amazing because it blooms late in the summer, so late August, September, and it has these huge flowers. Again, like how the plant is able to support these flowers is incredible. Tends to be a reddish or pinkish color, and it's a late season pollinator attractor. Then those seed heads are going to be persistent through the winter months, and so it's going to give your garden some winter interest as well. So this is an amazing plant. Again, Autumn Joy has been around forever and a year, and there's a couple others that you could also get. So these are late blooming sedums. There's one in a hypertufa pot or a rock pot. This is on my patio, and this overwinters year after year after year. I water it occasionally, but I never really remember it, and it's thriving. It is doing really well. One from Plant Select, this is a ground cover sedum. This is Turquoise Tails. Love Turquoise Tails because it almost looks like donkey's burrow if you've ever grown that house plant. Really cool, really compact foliage. It's a ground cover. You can see it on the left with the flowers. Maybe you love them, maybe you don't like them. But again, they do attract pollinators, and if it's not something you dig, you can just cut them off in front of an agave, which is cool, and a little ball cactus. But Turquoise Tails is great. Very, very easy to grow. Again, full sun, very sparing water, and it's just going to naturally fill in spaces, which is awesome. A newer one that's also a ground cover is called Winter Fire. Cultivar is called Rice Creek. So during the summer months, it's going to be this beautiful kind of limey green color. And then in the fall, turns this beautiful purpley red. This is phenomenal. So it's another ground cover that can give you some really nice fall interest and fall foliage. And it will stay this color through much of the winter and then regrow in the spring. So really awesome selections with these sedums. Here's Autumn Fire. So I mentioned Autumn Joy sedum. That's the old classic. Autumn Fire is also old, but it's a little bit newer. Autumn Joy tends to have a little bit of a lighter pink color. This one has kind of a deeper rose color, very similar. And there are some variegated ones as well. Have to call attention to hens and chicks because I think they have such great potential. These are another plant that, just like sedum, they're not going to like wet locations, so make sure you're not overwatering them. But there's a line of hens and chicks called Chick Charms, and they have the best names. So Cinnamon Starburst and Sugar Shimmer, which actually kind of is this fuzzy one, Berry Bomb. And I am such a sucker for names, and I have bought every single Chick Charm that I can find that has a different name. So I have this now collection of hens and chicks in my landscape. And yes, they're small, but they're really cool. And there's a lot of breeding that's going into it. So there's a newer one called Jetfire. It's not part of the Chick Charms, but it's this really dark, almost chocolatey foliage. And then they have all these characteristics of the hens and chicks. So anyway, look at the sedums, look at the succulents. There's a lot of great selection out there that you can consider. Lavender is a great plant. So the thing with lavender is to plant it in the spring. Fall planted lavender is kind of fussy, but once it finds its location, it's going to perform beautifully for you. It doesn't need a lot of pomp and circumstance. It doesn't want heavily amended soils. Think about where lavender grows naturally. It's a Mediterranean plant and it grows on the rocky cliffs in the Mediterranean. So try to replicate that in your landscape. Now, it can grow well in clay. And if that's where it's going to go, I would plant it in the spring so it has a season to establish. All the lavenders, for the most part, are going to be hardy to zone 5. So if you're higher in elevation or you're a little bit colder, it may not be a plant. Or if you try to grow it really protected during the winter with some good mulch around the crown or the base of the plant. The most hardy types we can grow are the English lavenders. And if the name sounds English, it's probably English. We have some other types of lavender that come into the market. There's Spanish and there's French. Those are not going to be hardy plants. So English lavender is going to be the hardiest ones that we can grow. Cultivars like Hidcote and Munstead and Mitcham Gray. Just picture an English person saying those names and you can get a great vision. So that is lavender. Spring planted is best. In the spring, if it overwinters, you will start seeing some of the new growth at the base. That's when you start to cut it back. So you can cut it back pretty close to the ground, and then it's going to bloom on new foliage. This is kind of a misnomer because it's a perennial, but it's kind of a woody perennial because it gets some woody plant tissue at the base. But all of the new growth is going to be herbaceous or leafy, and that's how it's going to bloom. There is one, it's a dwarf lavender that was introduced from Plant Select called Wee One. And if you have a rock garden or you have places where you can tuck this, it's only 12 inches tall. It's a true English lavender. It's just a dwarf type, and it is pretty much the cutest thing you've ever seen. So look for Wee One, readily available on the market, and is a little bit nicer because the typical English lavender can get to be about 24 to 30 inches tall. So this is only about a foot. Coneflower is one that I think everybody can grow. Coneflower is an easy to grow, really reliable perennial, very hardy, very cold tolerant to zone 3, and it is another one that loves it hot and dry. Actually, coneflower grows so well that I would consider it to be borderline invasive, especially if you leave the seed heads standing in the winter. You will have coneflower naturally reseed in parts of your landscape, whether you like it or not. Some people love it. I have found it to get maybe a little bit out of control. So I've made it a goal to kind of control them and then cut back some of the flowers so that I don't have as much reseeding pressure. The plant itself can reach heights of 4 feet. It does look better when it's naturalized, although they are introducing more coneflowers, more echinacea to the market that are going to be smaller and kind of are a little bit more clump forming, which is really great. Amazing cut flowers, amazing pollinator plants, and a really nice one to leave in the winter months, not only for winter interest, but also to help feed some of our songbirds that overwinter. These are 3 coneflowers that are currently in the perennial trials. They were planted a year ago, so they've only been in the garden for 1 season. But I just wanted to call your attention to the coolness that is the coneflower and the breeding that's going on. So on the far left, we have Sun Seeker's Golden Sun. It's hard to even tell that's a coneflower. It almost looks like a zinnia, just based on how many flowers are present or how many petals are present. And then there's a whole series called Sun Magic. So there's Sun Magic Hot Red, we have Vintage Orange, which doesn't look very orange to me, but there's a whole series of plants. And so these coneflowers are not readily available on the market, but if they do well in the perennial trials, then they will start to get introduced. So just know that there's a lot of different coneflowers than just the plain old purple coneflower that you're used to. Again, all full sun, all very drought tolerant and do remarkably well. Panicum is switchgrass, and switchgrass is a great grass. It is a warm season, so we've talked about how plants, there's a lot of grasses, they're cool season or warm season, so this is going to green up after the weather warms, usually late May or June. This is a bigger grass, so up to 5 feet tall. But what I love about the panicum is that the seed heads are really interesting. So here are the seed heads, and they'll start to bloom usually July, August, and they're so wispy and airy, and they sometimes have like a really beautiful pinkish color to them. So I like to say they're like fireworks above the foliage of the grass. Like little blue stem, a lot of the panicums or the switchgrasses can have really wonderful fall color. So this is a taller plant, so consider it for the corners of the landscape or somewhere behind other plants because it is 5 feet tall. And again, it's going to have really beautiful fall color. So another one that stays upright during the winter months, so it's not going to fall over. You can get them that come in more yellow. You can have them with more red fall color. And I think I have just a couple of cultivars. So Northwind was a University of Minnesota introduction. So talk about cold hardy. Anything that comes out of Minnesota is going to be really, really tough. Northwind is a very beautiful, very symmetrical and clump forming grass. These are not grasses that are going to spread. They're going to keep their form. And if you're type A like me, that symmetry is really beautiful. So this could actually work almost as a replacement for shrubs along a fence or really to define a line in the landscape. So Northwind is a beautiful one. Shenandoah is going to be the one that has the flecks of red. So it's going to be green, like a beautiful, just normal green all summer long. And then again, as the weather cools, is going to get these streaks of red that come in. It's a beautiful plant. This one is actually a little bit smaller, only about 3 to 4 feet tall, maybe a little taller with the seed heads, which you can see here. But there we have our friend the coneflower paired with it and how wonderful that looks. So heavy metal is one that's a little bit more grayish green all summer long. The foliage itself is a grayish green color. And then there are some that have more of a yellow fall color. So the switchgrasses, a lot of diversity, a lot of interest. And again, another way to add some fall color to the landscape. With that, I realize we have like 2 minutes left. I also know there's a ton of questions in the chat, but Phoebe, if there's any questions I can answer in the next couple minutes, I'm happy to do that. If not, again, I can put my name or my email address into the chat. Hopefully Phoebe can transport that over, or it's on the screen here, and you can reach out to me if I wasn't able to do that. I see you put it in there, but we're adding it again. Any final questions that I can answer? I realize I talked a mile a minute.
No, you're great and great timing. A lot of questions about sedums. In your experience, are sedums more aggressive? I personally haven't found that, but curious if you have experience with sedums being aggressive
I would
around.
never, yeah, I wouldn't call them aggressive or invasive. Now, do they find places to grow that you didn't plant them in? Yes. But are they also easy to remove and get rid of? They are.
Yeah.
Um, what I enjoy, maybe Phoebe, you found this too, is that they just pop up in little spots where maybe there's no plants and they take over, and it's a wonderful, beautiful thing where, you know, they fill in a gap, you don't have weeds, and they found a happy place. So